trauma ego is when the mind is dead set on finding a problem, finding some kind of threat, whether it's a threat to your life, a threat to your social connections, a threat to your job, whatever the threat is. The mind's job when it's traumatized is to find threat. It's not going to stop at any cost. Welcome to the Holistic Life Navigation Podcast, where we explore life through the lens of somatics. I'm Luis Mujica, a somatic educator who teaches people how to find safety in themselves. Your turn to learn begins now. Today's episode is not fully formed. This topic is not something that I talk about a lot. It is fully felt, and I've felt it in my body really since I first learned about paganism when I think I was 12 or 13, thanks to the craft. And I remember then just getting this sense of awareness of how much of our society and our comforts are built against nature to keep the elements out, whether it's to keep the cold out, whether it's to keep animals out. And obviously there's nothing wrong with this. This is called survival, right? And I see modern progress and the building of cities and roads and cars all as survival responses. Like, how can we continue surviving? And okay, so I'm going to be abstract today, just warning everybody. So this morning, I have a Jeep, and there's a key fob, one of those little things that you double click and it's supposed to turn on your engine to warm up your car. I live in the Catskill Mountains. It's extremely cold here. And so on like a -5-degree morning, it's really nice to double click that button and the entire car is de-iced and is warm and the seats are heated, all these things, which I've never experienced before. We were gifted this car last year from my parents because they got a new one. And so I've been really enjoying this feature. And today when I went to do it, it didn't work. Something in it burnt out and it's no longer, warming up for me. And I don't know why, but it made me laugh. It made me really giddy. And while I was laughing, from my body came just these words, which were, oh, does comfort interrupt humility? And it took me back to a very early memory. I was about 16, and I was deeply infatuated with Joni Mitchell. And I was watching many of her interviews because whenever I fall in love with a musician, first thing I do is I chronologically purchase their albums if they're, an older musician, so I can kind of feel the growth of the artist. And then I watch their interviews so I can just study them and get a sense of them and kind of osmotically feel their wisdom from their words and their body language and their face and such. And I remember this particular interview. I don't know why she said this, but the interviewer asked her some question and her answer was, we have become perverted by peace. When a society is given too much peace, it becomes perverted. And I didn't understand what she meant, but I felt it. And this is so not political. The last thing I care about are politics. And I think everyone knows that. And that's why some people love listening to me, because I don't go there. That's a whole other trap that I'm not willing to walk into for my own ego, not even publicly, for my own mental health, I should say. But when I think about the idea of peace perverting, it takes me to the practice of humility, and it takes me to the term human supremacy, which I've spoken about before. But I'm just fascinated by this concept because when I think of my ancestors, my indigenous ancestors, who were living within the elements of nature that were threatening, whether animals, predators, scarcity of food, I think of their rituals. I think of the offerings they make. I think of how every moment was woven with gratitude. partially for just the felt, I'm assuming, right? For the felt sense of, oh, I'm eating. This feels so good to be sustained. Thank you, beans. Thank you, squash. Thank you, fish. All the things that wherever these ancestors lived on whichever lands they had their foods and animals and land relatives they would thank for their sustenance. And also for the reality of, I don't know if this is going to happen tomorrow. I don't know if I'll eat tomorrow. I better give something back to appease, the spirits, the land, the ecosystem, whatever it is, so I can ensure my survival. And in that reciprocity of, I'm going to worship, I'm going to give something back, I'm going to dance for 2 hours to make it rain, there's a humility being practiced. And the humility is that I'm not the center of the universe. It's that this isn't here for me, it's here with me. And I remember when I discovered that myself, it was, how old was I? 25, I want to say 24, 25. And I had just moved to Woodstock, New York with Eamon from Brooklyn. And when we moved to Woodstock, we actually moved to this little town called West Saugerties. It's not even a town. It's like a line of houses that are right at the foothills of a mountain. About 800 feet up the mountain are these line of houses. And we lived right on what was called the Platte Clove. Really very powerful place. Also known as Devil's Kitchen, because there would be these paths that looked like you could walk on them, but they were moss and grass that grew over shale rock. And if you stepped on them, it would slide and you would fall to your death. And it was the highest population of copperhead snakes in the Northeast area. So it was called Devil's Kitchen because there's all these ingredients of death, essentially. And when we moved, we had very little money. I spent an entire year and saved $4,000 by literally eating nothing but beans and kale and brown rice and coconut butter as a snack while I lived in Brooklyn and worked at a health food store. And when we moved upstate, I had this $4,000. I used it for my security deposit. I paid the first month's rent, and then we had enough money for second month's rent. And we felt rich. We're like, whoa, look at us. We have a whole month's rent ready, which never happened for either of us. And what we didn't realize was how cold it was upstate. When you live in New York City, you are gifted with radiant heat that is free. The steam and the systems of the city, it heats up your house for free, your apartment. So you're in your apartment and it's 10 degrees outside and you have the windows open because the radiators are so hot. So that was my experience of living in the city. I never thought about paying for heat. I never even thought about being cold. Even in the city, you walk outside, it might be freezing. You can duck into a coffee shop for 2 hours and warm up. On the Platte Clove, if it would snow, you would be stuck in your house for hours, sometimes days, depending on your vehicle. We didn't have snow tires. Like, we had no idea what we were getting into. And so that first winter, we didn't have enough money for heat. And I found that out the hard way. I turned up the heat to like 75, and the bill was so high we couldn't afford it. So we lived with our heat somewhere between 55 and 60, which for my body is no bueno. This Boricua likes heat. And Eamon actually, she does somewhere in the middle, but I think all bodies like heat, but my body really likes heat. So I had to turn the heat down, and we developed this kind of like old disease or expression of the body known as chilblains, where the little capillaries in your fingers and toes literally rupture from being so cold, and you get these really painful, itchy blisters, and it can become infected. And my fingers were so swollen from playing my piano late at night. We were also living by candlelight to save on electricity. So we were kind of like pioneering it, if you will. I remember making a stew in the kitchen with a candle and the flame from the propane, thank goodness, which was very affordable, but just freezing and wearing jackets and scarves, and Eamon got chilblains on her toes. And I think my point of this is I started learning, oh, this is what it feels like to have humility. This is what it feels like to have comfort. there's this gratitude for a warm sock. There's this gratitude for the springtime and when the sun hits the house and it's warm for a few hours. And there's something very beautiful about that external reminder of my mortality and of how I'm just part of the equation. I'm not above it. I don't deserve more than some other being. I'm with you. And my possible death is just as probable and equal to your possible death. And something in that for me is very grounding. I appreciate it. It relaxes me. I experienced this when I didn't have money in the city and I would go days without eating a really proper meal. We would get $1. I lived in a hostel and we had a little tip jar. And the tip jar was actually for the staff. So people would, or rather, no, it was an internet jar. So it would say like 50 cents per 20 minutes. So guests would put a couple bucks in, they would use the internet. And then the staff would go and open that jar and we would use it to eat because most of us didn't have any money. We were living in a hostel and working out of it for rent. And right below us was an old Chinese bakery, which was amazing because Chinese bakeries in New York City have something called day-old bags. You pay $1 and you get a bag of like 5 to 6 savory and sweet pastries. So we would literally live off of that and dollar slices, which is like, you get for $1, you get this giant slice of cheese pizza on St. Mark Street in the Village. So I went through these periods of not eating normally like I would and being really hungry and really cold, but just so grateful for my freedom in the city and to be around such brilliant minds and meet new people and relinquish the confines of the suburbs that I had grown up with and let my brain unlearn so many things. It was so, that sustained me and that warmed me, even though I didn't have the comforts I was used to. So where I go with this humility piece is, I don't know, those of you listening, everyone's going to have a different experience. When I think of the world I live in, where right now my cabin is like 75 degrees inside, it's 20 degrees outside, and I have a car, and I have lots of friends, and I have a great computer that I can do this through, and I teach courses sitting in my pajamas, and I make great money doing that. And I feel so comfortable that I notice if I don't have a practice of self-inquiry, if I don't have a somatic practice of gratitude, I can very quickly get perverted by my comfort and my peace. Meaning, our traumatized nervous systems, our activated nervous systems create what I call trauma egos. Trauma ego is when the mind is dead set on finding a problem, finding some kind of threat, whether it's a threat to your life, a threat to your social connections, a threat to your job, whatever the threat is. The mind's job when it's traumatized is to find threat. It's not going to stop at any cost. When we don't have actual threat, when we're not living in actual survival, and I don't just mean working 2 jobs, I mean like pagan survival, where you must build your own fires, build your own homes, find and hunt for your food, grow your own food. We are so divorced from that. If we're not, if those of you listening are not, you've probably chosen to live off the land. It's a choice you've made, not the way you were brought up. If you're listening to this and it was the way you were brought up, I would love to hear from you. I'd love to hear some of your wisdom and input. Like, please write to me. But I guess what fascinates me about this is when we consider, again, the comfort with the trauma ego, and there's no actual threat anywhere, the mind starts to create threats. The mind starts to, and this is where the perversion piece comes in, the mind gets a bit perverse and it makes things threatening that aren't. It might mean I posted something on social media and no one commented on it. And the mind just explodes and the body ruptures and the activation surges through us. That's a perversion. And I'll tell you why. When I say perversion, by the way, I could be using the word wrong. I use words wrong lots of times. I'm much more somatic these days than intellectual. I used to be a great intellectual. But when I say perverse, what I really mean is a bit distorted and confused, incongruent. And so that trauma response, that adrenaline rush, that is a gift from my ancestors that literally needed it every day for survival. All of you listening, our ancestors needed that adrenaline to survive. And that adrenaline now gets overcoupled with situations that aren't threatening. So someone doesn't like me. Someone believes something different than me. Someone says something, someone misgenders me. Somebody, I mean, people always racially profile me incorrectly because I'm so white expressing, but I've never identified with being white. I'm a mix of Latino, Irish, and German. So I've always felt Puerto Rican Irish is what I believe because I'm more cultural than I am color. That's part of my decolonizing practice. But so many times people will be like, how does it feel to be a white cis privileged man? And I'm like, do you know anything about my background? I have no personal body experience being a white cis privileged man, but I am seen that way. So yeah, I get away with certain things. I'm very aware of that. And I'm saying all this because those moments could be ruptures in my body. And a humility comes in that says, Luis, you have pause. You are sitting in a heated room learning. My mind's going back to this moment where we were doing, when I was training for somatic therapy. The trainer looked at me and said, today we're going to work on social triggers. So we're going to ask you, Luis, how does it feel to be a cis, white, hetero, privileged man? And I said, I don't know because I'm actually mixed. I was born intersex and I'm queer. And she flushed red and had no idea because she just saw me and expected something onto me like we all do. And I felt this thing come through me, like this moment that I could be really angry and like put her in her place. And then the humility came in. And I said, whoa, this rush that's coming in, my ancestors used that rush to shuck sugarcane when they were 9. My grandpa, mi abuelo, was working in the sugarcane fields. He told me it was like sugarcane plantations, I should call them. He said that it was 110 degrees and he was 9 years old. They had no money. They would cut the sugarcane all day long, which is a very hard thing to cut. Then they would chew on it and suck the juice from it for some carbohydrates so they could survive the next day. That's what his adrenaline was used for. And here I am in this situation with somebody completely profiling me, not seeing me, not asking me who I am, but telling me who I am. And I felt that same feeling as if a bear was charging me, as if I was going to starve and go hungry. And these things happen a lot for me, not just that, but anything where I feel that rush come in because I'm triggered. And then the humility comes in, the reminder, Luis, wait a minute, this trigger is going to be perverted. It's going to be used against someone. It's going to amplify your ego. It's going to give you authority to oppress or put someone else down the way they're doing to you. And the only reason you can even use it for that is because you are privileged as a human being. It's because of human supremacy. Like, I have time to spend 8 hours in a heated room on the 34th floor in New York City, practicing learning how to feel into my body, right? Because I have been so comforted growing up. I haven't had to be in the elements. I haven't had to use my body. My adrenaline hasn't gone to survival. So my adrenaline goes toward these other things. And I'm not sure who needs to hear this message. To me, it's a pretty cool message. It might make no sense to you. It might not even reach you. But it's something I really want to bring in because in the how do I say that, the lifestyle of comfort, modern comfort, when we're specifically separated from nature, this is what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about class here. Class is still within the human species culture we've created. It's a construct and it affects people for sure. I've been in different classes. I know how it feels. I'm talking about pagan survival, where there is nothing between you and the elements of nature that could kill you or nurture you. We are so we are so divorced and separated from that. Our society is essentially a big wall against those elements, which is why we've been able to thrive. Just like animals will thrive in our house more than they will in the wild, right? So I'm saying it's interesting to me that in this amount of peace that we're given, our traumatized nervous systems won't allow us to feel that peace. They will instead disorient us from our reality of peace and reorient us toward a possible, an expected, or a projected threat. I will focus all my time on the injustice of a situation and miss all the justice in my own home of the heat coming through the heaters, of the sun shining through the trees, of air in my lungs. And this is not a call to bypass pain and trauma and others and injustice at all. It's a call, if anything, or an offering or an invitation, if you will, to not match it, to see it, and then remember, wait a minute. Can I tune to my comfort? Can I feel the humility of without this comfort, I wouldn't have the time to even care about these things I care about. And why that's important to me is it grounds us into our bodies, because then we're able to experience this modernity, this modern comfort in a somatic way that nurtures and expands our capacity, so we don't get triggered, so we don't go off the deep end, so we don't oppress and hurt other people, so we have capacity to tolerate sensations of other people's suffering, of other people's difference. So we get to, in a peaceful world, which if you watch the news, you're going to say, Luis, what are you talking about? But look at your world right now. This is for the individual. This is not for the collective or the global. This is for each person listening here. Look around right now, not at your mind, but at your surroundings. And let your eyes show you if there is a threat in front of you right now. Not a discomfort, not an irritation, not an annoyance, not an inconvenience, a threat. And most of us listening to this, looking around, will notice there is nothing here right now that's threatening my life. In fact, if we really look, we'll see how many things are here supporting our lives. Let's do that together. I'll share what I'm seeing. I'm seeing my phone here, and how this phone, which I resisted for so long, has connected me to so many beautiful people. I couldn't even begin to think it could do that. And it has. It's changed my life. I'm looking at a window that allows me to see trees and a running creek and sun coming through the trees. And I'm so grateful this window gives me a sense of ease and peace that I can look out and see the beauty of this land. I feel the saliva in my mouth, which tells me I'm hydrated. I drank water an hour ago. I have water that's clean. I'm sitting on a chair that allows me to not use my muscles to hold myself up. I'm talking into a microphone. I have a ring light that makes me look healthy and attractive so I can do these videos and feel confident. There is so much supporting my life here. And I could easily orient to something someone said to me on social media. I could easily orient to something happening politically. I could very easily orient to pain and shootings and any kind of injustice and violence going on throughout the world. And when I orient to those things, I practice bypassing these things. And bypassing these things is the modern equivalent of my ancestors eating and throwing their food out and saying, oh, there'll be more tomorrow. And not doing a ritual of gratitude, not staying humble in orienting toward what sustains them. When we orient toward what sustains us, we live in a state and in a practice of gratitude. And in a peaceful society and a peaceful life, when we are not fighting for our lives every day, we get to actually experience somatically the reality of our survival. And then we get to notice the difference of a real-time moment of threat, which will happen to us even in, beautiful modern worlds. We will experience threat. And with a somatic conscious practice, we'll also experience the absence of threat. And by noticing those two things, we start to notice that these moments of threat are drops in an ocean of peace and tranquility. And instead of that peace becoming perverted, because, okay, well, where does this survival energy go? Oh, it's going to go toward, negative thoughts or judging people or watching the news, right? It gets reoriented. So the peace doesn't drive my adrenaline to a place to make chaos for me. Instead, the peace relates to my adrenaline. My adrenalized nervous system starts to settle because it's feeling the peace. And then I'm able to show up in the world, say what I want, be who I am, and feel safe while doing it, not relying on the outside world to tell me I'm safe or it's okay or now I have permission, because I'm orienting toward what sustains me. So I thank you for spending this time with me. I love just letting my mind unfurl with you. It feels so safe because I'm in my body while I'm doing it. I feel very sustained, and I feel sustained by you. It's a privilege to have people listen and spend time and witness. And I'm endlessly moved and in honor and in gratitude when I get your letters and your emails and I see the reviews you leave on the podcast. It just touches me so deeply. So I would love to hear where this practice takes you. Thank you so much for joining me. That's the end of today's episode. Now let's take a moment to notice where we feel the episode in our bodies. Close your eyes. Take a breath. And let whatever wants to come up, come up. And remember, those sensations hold the wisdom that we're looking for. If you want to go deeper, visit holisticlifenavigation.com.